Hey folks, surprise balance changes have just been announced. Big change to Demon Hunter and some enormous changes to Battlegrounds.
Hey buddy, watch this.
All right, yeah, up first here, only one change coming to constructed Hearthstone. It's Demon Hunter's Twin Slice, another Demon Hunter nerf, by the way, crazy. And it's going from 0 mana to 1 mana on both halves, but it's also going from +1 attack to +2 attack. So you could maybe argue this isn't a strict nerf since it's getting some upside for its additional mana cost, but in reality, I'm pretty sure it's a substantial nerf. And there are basically 4 ways in which Twin Slice operates right now, and I think this makes it worse in all those ways. So perhaps most notably is Altruist. You want to play a lot of Twin Slices with Altruist, and then being at 0 mana means you get all these extra Altruist whirlwind effects that deal a ton of damage to everything, clear your opponent's board, hit their face, and it doesn't cost you any extra mana to do that. So you can squeeze in, maybe like 4 different Twin Slice casts between Twin Slice and Second Slice and get this huge free board clear face damage push alongside whatever other tools you have. When you move it to 1 mana, that suddenly becomes prohibitively much more expensive, and you can't squeeze all of those things together. That's now 4 mana to make all of that happen. And the additional attack upside on your face isn't worth, of course, giving up all of that additional mana. That's just ridiculous. Now, beyond that, there are some other really important Twin Slice breakpoints where it being at 0 mana really matters. There's things like Glavebound Adept on turn 5. Sometimes you want to play that Glavebound with its Battlecry effect active on 5. You need the 0 mana Twin Slice to do that. When it goes to 1, suddenly you have to wait until turn 6. Same thing for Satyr Overseer on turn 3. You need to use that Twin Slice to clear something of your opponents, summon that 2/2. Now you got to wait until turn 4 to do that with Twin Slice. And even on turns like turn 1, sometimes it can be really important to say play a minion, get your Battle Fiend down, and then double Twin Slice to clear your opponent's Blazing Battle Mage, for instance, so that your minion has that safe initiative on board, and that gives you that really big early game pressure advantage. When Twin Slice goes to 1 mana, you can still maybe clear their Blazing Battle Mage because you now have a +2 attack Twin Slice in hand, but you can't play the minion simultaneously. So this might be slightly better on turn 2 in some cases, where you play a 1-drop and kill your opponent's 1-drop. But I think in every other scenario across the board for Demon Hunter, this feels like a more awkward tool. Yes, it can pump out more total face damage that has some occasional upside on things like Warglaives of Azzinoth, but really the 0 mana aspect for Twin Slice was far more important than, a small marginal increase, even doubling its attack value. I don't think we'll go that far. So will Twin Slice still be playable? Maybe, just because Demon Hunter does still care about attacks. I mean, this now looks kind of worse than a card like Pounce even, or at least comparable to a card like Pounce in some ways, which doesn't seem favorable, but Demon Hunter has all these huge attack synergy cards. So I think Twin Slice is still a reasonable card. It still gets run. It's just not the kind of fuel or enabler that supports almost everything that Demon Hunter wants to do, which will substantially pull down Demon Hunter's power level once again, which frankly it probably still needs, especially as it gets new cards in future sets. I think we have to reduce that base expectation of power level for Demon Hunter a little, and this change is a good one to achieve that. I also like that it wasn't just a straight nerf, that Blizzard gave a little back to the card. That shows some nuance that we wouldn't have gotten 2 or 3 years ago, where it's yeah, we're going to give something back so the card isn't totally killed. That's cool. That's a good sign of design, and ultimately, I think this is a good change that harms the card, if not totally kills it. We also got some big changes here to Battlegrounds, both heroes and minions. Lord Jaraxxus getting buffed, going from 2 gold to 1 gold. Remember, this used to be 3 gold at first. It turns out these really narrow, synergistic hero powers like this are tough to use in Battlegrounds, because if your demon build's not coming together, you find a bunch of beasts or mechs or whatever, you're kind of stuck with a dead hero power. You have to force something specific, and that causes all kinds of flexibility issues. So these hero powers have to be really, really strong. And certainly this is now a really efficient buff. There's no doubt about that, but it's still a narrow one. So does this make Jaraxxus playable? Yeah, it helps a little for sure. Does it make Jaraxxus good, a high tier hero? I certainly don't think so. This will still feel like a very restricted hero power in some cases, where you just don't have that many use cases for it, or you try to build demons and it just does not come together because the game's trying to give you something else. So it will still fail in many cases, putting a cap on what could realistically be a very powerful hero power, as we've seen with things like Tyrion Forge Ring in the past. But it's not just across all these different minions, it's demons specifically. that's an issue. So next up is Reno Jackson here, going from 3 gold to 2 gold, which I think is really cool. I thought Reno was in a sort of okay spot before. He certainly wasn't a high tier hero, but I thought he was really, really fun to play. And if you were smart about it, you could still get some good, high rolly games out of him. He might have had a really kind of peak win rate and peak lose rate and not a lot in the middle. I think this does level him out a little bit, increase that consistency, because now you're not sacrificing quite as much to make that really high powered, golden brand or whatever it is. It makes this a little easier to squeeze into mid-game turns too if you're just going for something like a Soul Juggler, for instance. So I think this makes a big difference. It's only 1 gold, but having that extra roll or extra flexibility when you do decide to pop this button is nice. It's a small change, but I think that's probably all Reno needed, so I'm happy to see this. This is one of my favorite heroes to play, so I love that he's getting buffed. Moving on here to Maleficent Mana Storm. She's going from +2 attack to +1/+1, which we all know health is really, really important in Battlegrounds. Now, I will say attack is better for mechs than most types in Battlegrounds because they do utilize a lot of divine shields, and sometimes the health is less relevant than attack. But ultimately, particularly in the early game, this health scaling is really nice, and it's passive, unlike Jaraxxus, which means you don't have to spend your gold, which means you aren't sacrificing any efficiency to utilize these buffs. They just start stacking up naturally. Now, it does still have the same problem of Jaraxxus, where it's really narrow on one minion type. That's not ideal because in many cases you may not get mechs to line up. Oh no. But I think it's easier to use, and it's just kind of a freebie. So even if you only buy a few mechs here and there to kind of supplement your early board, just get that one random harvest golem, and it's suddenly a decent minion that keeps you alive for an extra round. Saves you a hit here and there. That adds up over the course of the game, even if you don't straight up force mechs. Plus, I think mechs are a fairly uncontested type. I guess that's kind of true for demons as well. So you might be able to squeeze in where other people aren't really competing for that minion type. Demons may be a little bit more competitive. Those Soul Juggler builds pop up from time to time, it feels like. All in all, another just totally fine hero power. I think it makes Maleficent solid, if not amazing, but it helps her out for sure. Moving on to Maiev. This is a small change, kind of hard to understand here just by reading it. But basically, in the past with Maiev, you'd make a minion dormant. It would occupy that slot in Bob's Tavern. So when you rolled, you'd actually get offered less minions, which really hurt your ability to find stuff you were looking for. They're changing it now so that dormant minions will no longer take up that slot in Bob's Tavern, and now you'll get offered the full amount and keep your dormant minion for later, so you retain some flexibility. There's a small caveat, of course. If you're already at 6 minions and you had 2 dormant minions, there's not enough space to show them all on board, so that would reduce you by 1, but otherwise 97% of the time you're going to get offered your full complement of minions, even if you have dormant stuff occupying board slots. So now a few minion changes I'll tease you there, all in the beast package in a weird way. Scavenging Hyena going from tier 2 to tier 1, which I guess at one stage of Battlegrounds I would have thought was mind-boggling. But nowadays I think that's actually fairly reasonable. Sometimes Hyena builds are hard to get off. It's not usually a part of the late game builds either. So it can be one of those cards that like helps you scale through the mid game and helps you win a few rounds here and there. But it didn't necessarily feel like it was equivalent to tier 2 minions, particularly on its own. You couldn't just kind of buy it for stats. You had to have some synergy, so its dependence on other stuff to work does make it feel a little bit more like a tier 1 card to me. It's fine at 1 as far as I'm concerned. I don't really see any problems here, even if it can scale like crazy. There are a lot of tier 1 minions that scaled, but this scales in combat and not in Tavern, which means it's good for survivability and winning combat rounds, but it's not good to like move into your eventual late game build in most cases. Now, on the other side of that equation is Rabid Sorrelisk going from tier 1 to tier 2. I think this is a vitally important change. Rabid Sorrelisk has been way too dominant at tier 1. It scales like crazy. It makes it all the way to your final board. That's all pretty absurd. It's getting a small health buff to help that. I guess that's fine as far as I'm concerned. But this does a couple things. It limits those like Captain Hook Tusk, stay on tier 1 strategies where you just cycle into a bunch of Sorrelisks, keep buffing it like crazy, and do completely unfair things for what a tier 1 minion should provide. This makes it hard to do that. It also just prevents, kind of some mid-game scaling a little bit because it reduces the likelihood of finding Sorrelisks. There are less in the pool at tier 2. So great change here, pretty necessary one. I thought we might even just see this card like removed or have the effect changed in some way. It absolutely needed to be changed. Hopefully this is a significant enough change to do that. And then finally, Monstrous Macaw going from tier 2 to tier 3. Basically the exact same story here. Macaw has been way too good supporting big death rattles, things like Goldrin to activate this just obscene board buffs for beasts, sometimes in combination with your rabid Soralisks. And moving that back into tier makes it harder to find. It makes it slower for those like Spawn of N'Zoth early bumps from it as well. So a couple changes here to reduce the impact of Macaw. Now people have to fight a little bit harder over this because there's just not as many tier 3 units, and it won't be able to power spike you quite as early in the game either. So I've honestly thought this could maybe be like a tier 4 unit. Frankly, I was thinking about jumping it 2 spots, but there's nothing wrong with subtlety. And I'm sure if it's still really, really crazy at tier 3, it could get moved up to 4 again. But let's see how this one works. So ultimately, a very necessary change once again. These were certainly the 2 like problem cards in my mind right now in Battlegrounds. Hyena was not something I thought about, but this is obviously just a change to like swap the beasts from, swap their tier positions, which is completely fine in my mind. Apparently a few other small bug fixes here in this patch as well. Now, I think one really noteworthy thing here is that Captain Hooktusk didn't get nerfed. Captain Hooktusk has been, trying to pull up the data, has been, according to HS Replay, far and away the strongest hero in Battlegrounds, and it's not even close. It's actually by a mile. She's far and ahead of everything else. Clearly a tier higher than any other hero in Battlegrounds. She's not being changed. Now, I think a lot of people would have expected a nerf, myself included, but keep in mind a lot of her power does rely on Rabid Soralisk in many cases. So if Soralisk gets changed, maybe Hooktusk takes a hit from that significant enough that she doesn't necessarily need a nerf, in case you're worried about Captain Hooktusk specifically. So all in all, pretty crazy changes. I think these are going to be some nice moves in Battlegrounds. Certainly going to make Reno a lot more fun, which I'm excited about. Limit Soralisk builds, which is great. Slow down Macaw, that's awesome. And Twin Slice, I think, will have a meaningful impact on the constructed meta as well. Because really, this felt like secretly the one tool that was making so many really powerful breakpoints and swing turns for Demon Hunter. It's now been slowed down. I think that slows Demon Hunter down and helps the meta. That said, if you have thoughts on these cards, of course, share those down in the comments below. Thanks so very much for watching, and until next time, game on.